Bullies jeered as Ethan hit the cold hallway floor, his books scattering across the polished linoleum. The sound of laughter bounced off the metal lockers, echoing down the corridor where other students quickly averted their eyes, pretending not to notice. This was the third time this week that Brad and his friends had targeted him. "Look at the nerd trying not to cry," Brad sneered, high-fiving his friend Tyler, who had executed the leg sweep that sent Ethan tumbling. "Maybe if you weren't such a scrawny little freak, you'd actually have friends." Ethan slowly gathered his physics textbook and notebooks, his eyes downcast as he tried to control his breathing. At 5 feet 8 inches and 145 pounds, he wasn't physically imposing. His wire-rimmed glasses and quiet demeanor made him an easy target in the social hierarchy of Westlake High. What Brad and his crew didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that beneath Ethan's unassuming exterior lay years of disciplined training and competitive success. Every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday for the past 7 years, Ethan had trained at JIU-JITSU Academy across town. He had earned his brown belt at 16, faster than anyone in the history of the academy. Last summer, he had taken gold at the Junior National Championship in his weight class, executing a perfect arm bar in the final round that had his coach in tears of pride. The walls of his bedroom were adorned not with the typical teenage posters but with medals, tournament brackets, and photos of him standing on podiums. "Maybe you should say something, freak? Or are you too scared?" Brad taunted, stepping closer until his shadow fell across Ethan's crouched form. The smell of Brad's expensive cologne was overwhelming as he loomed over Ethan. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. Ethan's trained eye immediately assessed Brad's posture, weight unevenly distributed, center of gravity high, completely vulnerable to at least 5 different takedowns that Ethan could execute with minimal effort. The thought flickered through his mind like lightning. A simple collar drag would put Brad on his back in less than a second, and from there, Ethan could control him without causing any real damage. Tyler stood just behind Brad, his stance even more vulnerable. A sweep to the ankle would collapse him instantly. The third bully, Mark, was leaning against the lockers, completely unprepared for any counterattack. In competition, Ethan had faced opponents twice as skilled and 3 times as dangerous as these untrained teenagers. But as his fingers reflexively positioned for a grip, Ethan felt a wave of conflicting emotions wash over him. His sensei's words echoed in his mind. "The true purpose of jiu-jitsu is not to harm, but to protect yourself and others. It gives you the confidence to walk away from conflict because you know what you're capable of." Ethan had never used his skills outside the academy or competition mats. The discipline of jiu-jitsu had taught him control, not just of his opponent's body, but of his own impulses. He remembered the pride in his mother's eyes when he explained to her that jiu-jitsu was about leverage and technique, not violence. How many times had his coach emphasized that their art was designed to allow a smaller person to defend themselves without causing permanent injury? Brad mistook Ethan's momentary stillness for fear and laughed, nudging Tyler. "Look at him, he's frozen like a little rabbit." Ethan slowly rose to his feet, his breathing measured and controlled just as it was before a tournament match. He pushed his glasses back up the bridge of his nose and looked Brad directly in the eyes for the first time. Something in Ethan's steady gaze made Brad's smile falter slightly. "Is there a problem here?" A teacher's voice cut through the tension as Ms. Reynolds approached from the science lab. Brad immediately stepped back, his demeanor shifting instantly. "No problem, Ms. Reynolds. Just helping Ethan pick up his books?" Brad said with practiced innocence, even bending down to retrieve a pencil that had rolled near his foot. Ms. Reynolds looked skeptical but continued walking after giving Brad a warning look. As she disappeared around the corner, Brad leaned in close to Ethan's ear. "This isn't over, freak. After school, behind the gym. No teachers to save you there." As the bullies swaggered away, Ethan stood perfectly still in the now empty hallway. He wasn't afraid, not of pain, not of confrontation. What he feared was losing control, of crossing that line between self-defense and becoming something he wasn't. He had seen aggressive competitors who brought their fighting spirit off the mats, who used their skills to intimidate others. That wasn't who he was or who he wanted to be. The late bell rang, jarring Ethan from his thoughts. As he hurried to class, his mind was already analyzing the situation like a chess problem. He could avoid the confrontation entirely by taking a different route home. He could tell a teacher, though that would likely make things worse in the long run. Or he could face Brad and his friends, knowing he had the skills to defend himself if absolutely necessary, but with the discipline to use only what force was required, if any at all. Throughout his afternoon classes, Ethan found himself distracted, mentally rehearsing techniques that could control without injuring, that could de-escalate rather than dominate. In jiu-jitsu competition, the goal was submission, making your opponent concede defeat. But in life, sometimes victory meant finding a solution where nobody lost face. As the final bell rang, Ethan felt a strange calm settle over him. The same focused tranquility he experienced before stepping onto the competition mat. Whatever happened behind the gym today, he would face it with the true spirit of a champion, not just with technical skill, but with the wisdom to know when and how to use it. The true test wouldn't be whether he could defeat Brad and his friends. He knew he could, but whether he could remain true to himself and the principles that made him a champion in the first place. The final bell rang, its shrill tones sending students flooding into the hallways. Ethan deliberately took his time packing his notebooks, allowing the initial rush to subside. His math teacher, Mr. Daniels, glanced up from his desk with mild concern. "Everything all right, Ethan? You seemed distracted today." "Just tired, sir," Ethan replied with a forced smile. "Tournament preparation." Mr. Daniels nodded knowingly. He was one of the few teachers aware of Ethan's competitive achievements, having attended a local competition to support him last year. "Well, don't overdo it. That brain of yours needs rest too." Ethan thanked him and stepped into the now thinning corridor. Each footstep toward the gym felt heavier than the last. He could simply walk away, take the front exit, avoid the confrontation entirely. Nobody would blame him, but something inside pushed him forward. Not pride or anger, but a strange sense of responsibility to himself. Behind the gym was a small courtyard partially hidden by the equipment shed, a notorious blind spot for the school's security cameras. As Ethan rounded the corner, he found exactly what he expected. Brad and his two friends lounging against the brick wall, faces lighting up with predatory anticipation when they spotted him. "Well, look who decided to show up," Brad sneered, pushing himself off the wall. "Thought you might run home to mommy." Ethan stopped about 10 feet away, set his backpack down carefully, and removed his glasses, folding them into his shirt pocket. The world blurred slightly at the edges, but he could see clearly enough. "I don't want trouble," Ethan said evenly. "This doesn't have to happen." Tyler laughed. "Listen to him. This doesn't have to happen," he mimicked in a high-pitched voice. "What are you going to do about it, anyway?" Ethan felt his heart rate accelerate, his body instinctively preparing for what was coming. The familiar pre-fight adrenaline surge coursed through him, but unlike competitions where it sharpened his focus, now it clouded his thoughts with conflicting impulses. Brad stepped forward, closing the distance. "You made me look bad in front of Ms. Reynolds. Nobody does that." The first shove came fast, harder than in the hallway, sending Ethan stumbling back a step. His body automatically adjusted, distributing the force, maintaining balance. Brad's eyes widened slightly at Ethan's composed recovery. "Fight back, you coward," Brad growled, delivering another push. Ethan felt something shifting inside him, a dangerous tipping point approaching. 7 years of training had embedded responses so deeply that they were becoming difficult to suppress. His hands instinctively rose to a neutral position. Brad mistook the movement for fear. "Finally going to defend yourself, freak? Let's see what you've got." He threw a wild, looping punch aimed at Ethan's face. Time slowed. Ethan saw the punch telegraphed in Brad's shoulder, his weight shifting forward predictably. In competition, this would be a gift, an overcommit attack leaving countless openings. Without conscious thought, Ethan slipped to the outside of the punch, his hand catching Brad's wrist while his other palm found Brad's elbow. A simple redirection of momentum would send Brad face-first into the dirt. From there, a transition to back control would be textbook. But mid-movement, as his muscles began executing the technique, a powerful conflict erupted within Ethan. The voice of his first sensei echoed. With great skill comes great responsibility. The moment you use jiu-jitsu against someone untrained, you accept liability for whatever happens. In that split second of hesitation, Brad's punch grazed Ethan's cheek. The sting of contact snapped Ethan back to full awareness. He had to make a choice. With deliberate restraint, Ethan modified the technique. Instead of the takedown, he simply deflected Brad's arm outward, causing him to stumble off balance but remain standing. The move was so subtle it appeared to onlookers that Brad had simply missed and tripped. What the hell? Brad spun around, confusion and anger battling on his face. Lucky dodge. Tyler stepped forward now. Let me show you how it's done. As Tyler advanced, Ethan felt the internal struggle intensify. Every instinct from countless training hours screamed for him to end this quickly, to protect himself with the skills he'd sacrificed so much to develop. A simple double-leg takedown would incapacitate Tyler without causing injury. From mount position, Ethan could control him until he calmed down. But using his training this way felt like a betrayal of everything it represented. Jiu-jitsu had given him confidence, discipline, and community. It wasn't meant for dominating untrained teenagers in schoolyard fights, no matter how justified. Tyler swung wildly. This time, Ethan deliberately backed away, allowing the punch to miss by inches. "I don't want to fight you," he said, his voice steadier than he felt inside. "Too bad. Because we want to fight you?" Mark chimed in, moving to circle behind Ethan. The tactical part of Ethan's brain recognized the immediate danger. Being surrounded would limit his options dramatically. Yet using his full capabilities would mean crossing a line he wasn't sure he could uncross. As Mark lunged from behind, aiming to grab him in a bear hug, Ethan made another split-second decision. He dropped his weight slightly and pivoted, causing Mark to grasp empty air as Ethan sidestepped with the efficient movement of a trained grappler. Again, he pulled back from the counter that would have sent Mark flying. "Stand still," Mark growled in frustration. Brad, recovered now, charged forward like a bull. The attack was so predictable that Ethan could have countered it in his sleep. Instead, he waited until the last possible moment before executing a minimal technical stand-up, using just enough movement to avoid the brunt of the impact, while allowing Brad's momentum to carry him forward. Brad crashed into Mark, sending both boys tumbling to the ground in an undignified heap. Tyler stood frozen, looking between his fallen friends and Ethan with dawning uncertainty. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded. "Nothing," Ethan replied truthfully. "That's the point." Brad scrambled to his feet, dirt smudging his designer jeans, his face flushed with humiliation. "You're doing some kind of kung fu crap, aren't you?" he accused, pointing a finger at Ethan. "Fight for real." The irony wasn't lost on Ethan. He was being criticized for not fighting properly by someone who had no concept of what fighting properly meant. In that moment, the tension within him began to transform into something unexpected. Compassion. These boys, for all their bravado, had no understanding of what real combat entailed. They had never experienced the humbling process of being repeatedly submitted by smaller, more skilled practitioners. They had never felt the paradoxical combination of vulnerability and empowerment that came from true martial arts training. "This isn't what you think it is," Ethan said quietly, relaxing his stance slightly. "And I'm not who you think I am." "What's that supposed to mean?" Brad demanded, his voice carrying a new edge of uncertainty. The confidence that had fueled his aggression was visibly cracking as he wiped dirt from his palms. Before Ethan could respond, the sound of a door opening echoed across the courtyard. Coach Martinez stepped out of the equipment shed, keys jangling in his hand. He paused, taking in the scene with the experienced eye of someone who had broken up countless schoolyard confrontations. "Everything all right out here, gentlemen?" he called, his deep voice carrying across the space. "Just talking, coach," Brad replied quickly, straightening his shirt with forced casualness. Coach Martinez looked skeptical. His gaze lingered on Ethan, noting his calm stance and the redness on his cheek. "Ethan, these boys giving you trouble?" An opportunity presented itself. A simple word from Ethan would land all three bullies in detention. The vindictive satisfaction tempted him for a fleeting moment. "No trouble, coach," Ethan said instead. "Just a misunderstanding we're working through." The coach studied him for a moment longer. "All right then, but this area is off-limits after hours. You boys head home now." As Coach Martinez walked away, an uncomfortable silence settled over the four teenagers. Tyler and Mark exchanged glances, clearly eager to leave but waiting for Brad's lead. Brad himself seemed caught in some internal struggle, his usual swagger deflated by the unexpected turn of events. "This isn't over," Brad muttered. But the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. Ethan retrieved his backpack and carefully placed his glasses back on. The world came into sharper focus again. "It can be," he offered quietly. "It should be." Brad's face flushed. "What, you think you're better than us? You think because you know some moves you can just—" "Jiu-jitsu?" Ethan interrupted, surprising himself with his boldness. "Brazilian jiu-jitsu. That's what I train in. 5 days a week for the past 7 years. The specificity of the statement caught Brad off guard. "So what?" "So nothing," Ethan shrugged. "It just teaches you that winning doesn't always look like what you'd expect." Brad scoffed, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. "You didn't win anything. You just dodged like a coward." "In jiu-jitsu?" Ethan continued, finding strange confidence in finally speaking about his passion. "The goal isn't to hurt your opponent. It's to control the situation. Sometimes the best submission is the one you don't have to use." Tyler, who had remained silent, suddenly looked at Ethan with new interest. "Wait, is that the grappling stuff they use in UFC? With the chokes and arm locks?" Ethan nodded. "Among other things. So you could have." Tyler made a vague gesture with his hands. "That's not the point," Ethan said. "Anyone can hurt someone else. It takes more strength not to." Something shifted in the atmosphere between them. Mark shuffled uncomfortably while Tyler looked at Ethan with growing respect. Only Brad maintained his hostile stance, though it seemed more performative now than genuine. "Whatever," Brad muttered. "Let's go, guys. This is stupid." As they turned to leave, Ethan made a decision that surprised even himself. "There's an open mat at Gracie Academy on Saturdays," he called after them. "If you ever want to see what it's really about." Brad didn't turn around, but Tyler paused, giving Ethan a small nod before jogging to catch up with his friends. Alone in the courtyard, Ethan let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His hands trembled slightly with the aftermath of adrenaline. He hadn't thrown a single strike, hadn't executed a single takedown or submission, yet somehow he felt as if he'd fought the most important match of his life. The walk home took Ethan past the community center where he'd first discovered jiu-jitsu as a shy 10-year-old seeking refuge from similar bullies. He remembered his first instructor, Professor Marcos, demonstrating how a 120-pound woman could control a 200-pound man with proper technique. "Jiu-jitsu is the gentle art," he'd explained. "It gives power to those who would otherwise have none. But with that power comes the responsibility to use it wisely." At the time, young Ethan had only cared about not being pushed around anymore. He couldn't have understood the deeper truth he'd discovered today, that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from imposing your will on others, but from mastering yourself. When Ethan arrived home, his mother noticed the slight bruise forming on his cheek. "What happened?" she asked, immediately concerned. Ethan considered his response carefully. "I learned something important today," he said finally, "about why we train." That evening, as Ethan prepared for his usual training session, he packed his GI with particular care. When he entered the academy, Professor Marcos greeted him with a curious look. "You seem different today, Ethan. Good different. Like something's changed." Ethan smiled as he bowed onto the mats. "I think I finally understand what you've been teaching me all these years." Professor Marcos raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And what's that?" "That the strongest person in the room isn't the one who can hurt others," Ethan replied. "It's the one who doesn't need to." The professor's weathered face broke into a proud smile. He clapped Ethan on the shoulder before calling the class to attention. As they lined up by rank, Ethan stood tall among his fellow practitioners, the weight of his brown belt around his waist feeling more earned than ever before. 3 weeks later, as Ethan was demonstrating a technical stand-up to a new white belt, an unexpected visitor appeared at the edge of the mats. Tyler stood awkwardly in street clothes, watching the class with nervous curiosity. When the drilling period ended, Ethan approached him. "You came." Tyler nodded. "Brad thinks I'm at my cousin's house." He hesitated. "That thing you did. Not fighting back but not getting hurt either. I want to learn that." Ethan smiled and gestured toward Professor Marcos. "First class is free. And Tyler? It takes courage to show up on the mats the first time." As he watched Tyler introduce himself to the professor, Ethan felt something full circle. The art that had once been his private sanctuary was now a bridge to understanding. He couldn't change everyone, Brad might never understand, but that wasn't the point. The true victory wasn't in dominating his bullies that day behind the gym. It was in recognizing that he had already won long before the confrontation ever happened. Not through physical technique, but through the mental discipline and spiritual growth that made him strong enough to choose restraint when he could have chosen dominance. On the mats, as in life, the true champion was not the one who could destroy others, but the one who could master himself. And in that most difficult of battles, Ethan had emerged victorious.